Good afternoon. I'm Mary Alice Parks. This is the briefing room. We have some breaking news this afternoon. The New York City police officer who was partially blamed for the chokehold and death of Eric Garner 5 years ago, a death that really sparked outrage across the country, really contributed to the Black Lives Matter movement. Well, that police officer has been fired 5 years later. I want to play the sound from the New York City Police Commissioner just today. Let's take a listen.
It is clear that Daniel Pantaleo can no longer effectively serve as a New York City police officer. In carrying out the court's verdict in this case, I take no pleasure. I know that many will disagree with this decision, and that is their right. There are absolutely no victors here today. Not the Garner family, not the community at large, and certainly not the courageous men and women of the police department.
I'm joined by one of our lead investigative reporters, Aaron Katersky, there in New York, that's been following every twist and turn of this case. Aaron, it took 5 years and multiple legal battles. What finally gave?
Well, this was the end of the road, really. There was a departmental disciplinary process underway for the last couple of years, and finally an administrative judge recommended that Daniel Pantaleo get fired, Mary Alice, and she did so after finding that he was reckless in using the chokehold maneuver that's banned by the regulations of the NYPD. But she acquitted Pantaleo of strangulation, which means effectively that she found there was no intent to put a maneuver on him that would cause his death. Ultimately, that chokehold, the medical examiner's office here found, led to an asthma attack, and that's what contributed to Eric Garner's death. But you heard the police commissioner here almost from a place of reluctance. He was a uniformed cop for 34 years, and he really seemed to empathize with Officer Pantaleo's situation. He said it could have been me in his shoes, and it could have been me making that mistake. But every time he watches the video, and he said he has repeatedly of that fateful encounter on Staten Island 5 years ago, Mary Alice, he says that he wants to tell Pantaleo, don't do it. And he wants to tell Eric Garner, don't do it. Don't resist arrest. Comply.
And there's that video. We've all seen it many times, and we remember those chilling words, the "I can't breathe" words from Eric Garner. You know, Pantaleo was not the only police officer. You see in that clip, there were so many others there. Talk to us about other repercussions that other police officers have received as a result of this incident.
The others, there are a couple more that could be brought up on departmental charges. That disciplinary process is underway for the sergeant of the group. But it was really Pantaleo who was the focal point of the disciplinary process. First, when the Staten Island district attorney declined to press criminal charges, and then when the Attorney General William Barr, after investigations by both the Obama and Trump administration Justice Departments, declined to pursue federal civil rights charges. And those decisions really left the NYPD departmental process as the only recourse for the Garner family. And the family itself says this is not the end of their fight. They're going to be pushing for a federal law to ban chokeholds from ever being used by any police department in the country.
I want to bring into this conversation the former chief of detectives for New York City, Chief Boyce. If you're there, help us understand the impact that Eric Garner's case had on policing, community policing. It went well beyond the NYPD.
It certainly did, and good afternoon. What this did in the last 5 years since the summer of 2014, if you remember the protests in the street, a nightly occurrence leading up into the fall of 2014, we had a police officer who only had his almost killed with a hatchet to his head. And we also had the assassinations of two of our cops, Rafael Ramos and Wenjen Lo. Terrible, terrible times. And we changed as a department, the police department, the NYPD, changed dramatically in that time. We're a much less invasive nature into our investigations, and also the training, the de-escalation training across the board. To train 36,000 people is quite a feat, and it was done in a very quick amount of time. So we've changed dramatically since that time. The city has actually grown and grown better. But we will never forget. I will never forget the 2014. And I remember quite well with the Garner family. First, the Staten Island DA not indicting, and then a succession of AUSAs passing on the case, and finally Richard Donahue very pointedly putting out a narrative of what actually did happen. We saw Jim O'Neill today. You could clearly see he was upset when he was giving this news out. I know him quite well as a good friend, and I saw him there. I saw him struggle at times. Every police officer knows that could have been us, could have been any one of us. In fact, it was us at one time. People do resist arrest from time to time. You see yourself in his position. You see himself taking the weight on this thing, Pantaleo. But again, the city has to move forward. Too many bad things have happened since then. Now it should be a new day, hopefully, going forward.
Yeah, you mentioned the Garner family. We have some sound of the Garner family reacting to this news this week. Let's take a listen.
Justice for New York City means Pantaleo is fired and there's no murdering cop on the police force. So, Commissioner O'Neill, while we appreciate you making your decision, we are definitely still calling for the Eric Garner law, which will ban the chokehold, which will ban officers being protected by a shield and not held accountable for their actions.
Chief Boyce, I want to ask you, was this firing inevitable? As much as you're talking about the commissioner's reluctance here and a sympathy to the other members of the police force felt, if a police officer is so controversial and an event and a case so public, does it have to end this way?
Yeah, perfectly honest with you, no, it doesn't. I wasn't sure which way he would decide, to be honest, and I haven't talked to him in a couple of weeks, but nonetheless, I think he took stock of his executive staff, asked their opinions, because I've sat in those meetings. I know what it's like through that. But at the end of the day, it's his decision and his decision alone. So there's all kinds of voices throughout the city, both political, in the media. He has to just sit through and go through this. So I don't think it was inevitable that he was fired. I think he did what he thought was best for the city of New York and the New York City Police Department. We have to understand what the effects of what it will do to police morale, which is imperative in this city when we ask young men and women to go out and risk their lives every day. They have to know that they're supported. So these things, and he'll put the process back together. Again, Commissioner O'Neill will go out to the precincts, we'll speak with people, we'll make those individual contacts that he's so famous for, and all the community ties that he's built in the last 3 years since he's been the PC. So I'm glad that he's staying. I'm glad he's our commissioner. He's a great man.
Thank you so much, Chief Boyce. Aaron, before I let you go, I want to ask you about the Bill de Blasio of it all. I've been out on the campaign trail and seen protesters upset about this case and others following Bill de Blasio around the country. Did Bill de Blasio weigh in here?
Well, he did today, and he said that this represented justice for the Garner family, and he had promised justice on a national debate stage, standing there with other Democratic candidates for president, and asked why there was no firing yet. And he said he was confident there would be, but he tried to walk a fine line. He said this was the NYPD's decision. And we asked Commissioner O'Neill repeatedly today whether he felt any political pressure to make this decision. He said he couldn't ignore the politics of it all. He knows that he's working for someone and at the pleasure of someone who's running for the presidency. But he said he did not want the politics to impact his case. That's not going to stop his critics. The police union, Pantaleo's union, has already said that it was a political decision. It was a self-interested decision. Although covering Commissioner O'Neill for a long time, I can say he's probably the least political, overtly political police commissioner New York has had in some time. But the politics were inevitable here, and he had a tough decision that was undoubtedly going to leave some people upset, and has.
Aaron Katursky there, one of our lead investigative reporters who knows New York City so well. Thank you, Aaron. I want to switch gears now to the president, who says that he has no concerns over a possible recession. He's been tweeting all weekend, and even today, we think we have some of those tweets from the president. He's talking about how our economy is strong and that it was only a lack of vision by the Fed, continuing to point blame, but saying the dollar is strong and, in fact, doing so much better compared to other parts of the world. I want to bring in one of our White House reporters, Jordan Phelps, there from the White House. Jordan, is this politically risky for the president to try to own the economy in such a big way? I mean, if things start to go south, can he keep placing blame somewhere else?
Well, Mary Alice, the economy has always kind of been the whole ball game for President Trump, so it's not really something he can walk away from. And he obviously has been blanketing Twitter with these tweets that our economy is the best in the world. He's had his top economic advisors out to push this narrative that there's no recession coming. The president, very much as he so often does, is pointing the finger elsewhere if there are any tremors in the U.S. economy, which he says he doesn't see. He says the problem is really out there in the rest of the world, that a recession might be happening elsewhere, but that in the United States we're strong because of his policies, he says. But what is, of course, ironic, Mary Alice, is with the president taking aim at Jerome Powell, the Fed chair. That is someone that the president handpicked for that job. But the president, can't place the blame directly on himself. And he says that things are strong, and he's already using this as a political point. We know out on the campaign trail, he was telling people that whether they love him or hate him, they need to vote for him, because he says that the economy will go down the tubes if not for his leadership.
Right. There's no doubt that the ongoing trade war with China and threats of tariffs have contributed to some of that jitteriness on Wall Street that we saw last week. Jordan, the president has yet to finish and sign any new trade deal. We know that his redo of NAFTA 2.0, as we call it in Washington, has not yet been ratified in the U.S. Congress. Anything going to move on this ongoing negotiations with China?
Mary Alice, this NAFTA 2.0, as you call it, USMCA, that is the administration's top priority heading into the fall. It's all ready to go. They just need to get Congress's approval. So there's this sense that there may have to be some give and take with Capitol Hill, specifically Nancy Pelosi, to get that across the finish line. But make no mistake, that's a top priority, so they can check something off the list. And as it relates to China, Mary Alice, the president very much wants to make a deal here. And he says that China wants to make a deal too. But as you know, those talks are at a stalemate, and the president really blinked for the first time in this ongoing trade war last week when he said that he was going to delay implementing those tariffs until December 15th. For a big chunk of those consumer goods, which is really the first acknowledgement we've seen by President Trump that U.S. consumers are paying a price here, even as he continues to insist falsely that China is absorbing all of the costs.
Jordan, thank you so much. I appreciate it. And back to the 2020 campaign trail we were talking about earlier. Today, a big day in Iowa, where a bunch of candidates are continuing to circle through a historic forum where Native American leaders from around the country are gathering in that early, crucial state to make their pitch to the presidential candidates, ask for listening time, and hear what the candidates have to say on their issues. I talked earlier today to one of those tribal leaders from Louisiana about what he was hoping to hear from the candidates. Let's take a listen. Chairman Sickey, thank you so much for joining us. Your tribe is in Louisiana, but you're holding this event in Iowa. Explain to us the significance of all these tribal leaders gathering in the early voting state.
First and foremost, it's extremely difficult to get our issues and concerns heard, even during a normal day. But tribal leaders to be here in person is extremely important to get in front of presidential candidates. And again, the idea is to have these one-on-one discussions and dialogues and exchanges so we could bring to the forefront what's most important to tribes, not only to the Coushatta's, but to tribes across the country. We are hoping to hear from the candidates a fundamental understanding of the core issues that are facing natives in this day and age and going forward. We want to hear from candidates what they're going to do as president for missing and murdered indigenous women across this country, which is at an all-time epidemic right now. We are hoping to hear from candidates issues such as tribal health care, tribal housing, tribal infrastructure. I was talking to a tribal leader this morning, for example. He showed me a picture of a road on a reservation back home that is completely washed out, and nobody's is offering up any type of appropriations or any funding to fix these roads. And of course, infrastructure contributes to job creation, workforce development. Tribal children need to get to schools. So with inadequate and substandard infrastructure on tribal lands across this country, that is unacceptable, and tribal leaders are not very pleased with that situation.
But is there a consensus that working with this administration has been different than working with administrations in the past? Is there a sense that a Democratic administration tends to treat tribes differently? Can you explain that relationship to us?
Historical relationships, depending on administrations, U.S. administrations, presidential administrations of the past, obviously you're going to see different priorities. And sometimes the previous administration, for example, prioritized prioritize Native American concerns and needs and interests. For example, the previous administration created and started the Tribal Nations Conference, which was discontinued under this current administration. Those are the things that we're interested in. And again, it's all about presidential administrations and their priorities. What's important to them as a president? What would they like to see? How and if they do prioritize Native Americans, what shape would that look like? What form would that take? First and foremost, you need funding for anything. So appropriations-wise, we need a lot of funding for tribal health care, housing and education, and social programs.
We're joined now by former Senator Heidi Heitkamp of North Dakota and an ABC News contributor. Senator Heitkamp, thanks for doing this.
No problem. Thanks so much for having me on.
And you've had a close relationship with tribes in your home state. And I want to talk to you about voter concerns when it comes to tribes. We talked to you a lot about this in the lead up to November, concerns that folks who lived on reservations didn't have some of the same opportunities to place their votes or were facing some really tough restrictions to cast their votes. Has there been any update on that?
Well, in many states like North Dakota, if it's a large land reservation, many times they don't even get postal delivery. So if your state requires a postal delivery address, a residential address on an ID, you don't have a residential address. And so the tribes in North Dakota were very, very aggressive in getting their tribal IDs to meet compliance requirements with the Secretary of State in North Dakota. But clearly, the whole law was designed to disenfranchise a lot of people, especially elderly people and Native American people who may not have that residential address. People who are homeless don't have a residential address. One of the great stories, I think, coming out of North Dakota is a number of the churches on the reservation offered their address as an address for tribal IDs. And so, this is a huge challenge. And I would say both political parties in many ways have left tribes behind. And I think it's terrific that the tribes have engaged very early on. I think that will create, hopefully, some competition between the political parties to address these issues. I listened to the interview. If you look at kind of leading issues, what tribal governments will tell you, what tribal people will tell you, they want their sovereignty recognized and protected, and they want strong government-to-government relationships with leadership coming out of the federal government to help honor those treaty rights, whether it's healthcare, whether it's education, whether it's housing. And certainly law enforcement is a major concern given the epidemic of drug abuse and suicides on the reservations.
Is it just a matter of more federal funding, or are there also bureaucratic challenges, there must be, that keep that relationship so tough?
Well, the jurisdictional challenges are tough because when you look at a felony crime in North Dakota, it's not prosecuted on the reservation by the state authorities. It's federal jurisdiction. The FBI is grossly understaffed in North Dakota to deal with the level of criminal activity. And I took the lead in introducing legislation to address murdered and missing Indigenous women's concerns. But where is the FBI when someone goes missing? Does the FBI engage the same way a local law enforcement authority would? Senator McCain and I were successful in getting an Amber Alert bill. Many places in Indian country didn't even have the opportunity to do Amber Alerts. And so there's a jurisdictional challenge, but there's a resource challenge, and healthcare is a huge component of that. If you look at the mandate in treaties that the federal government actually provide health care, and then you look at the per cost or the per patient contribution in Medicare and Medicaid, it's twice or three times what it is in the expenditure for Indian people. But Indian people experience serious healthcare concerns like diabetes, like behavior and mental health challenges, childhood trauma, which has led to a lot of challenges in terms of healthcare delivery. But yet that money is not forthcoming. And, Indian health has been basically absent without leave in many places in Indian country. So I think it's terrific that the tribes are organizing and they're demanding that their concerns be part of the dialogue in this election cycle.
You mentioned earlier that the tribes are also demanding the federal government stick to the original treaty obligations. That's a constant conversation. And I'm thinking in the last year, there's been so much focus on just the use of the land. We've talked about sacred land in the Bears Ears area. We've talked about Standing Rock in your neck of the woods. I was thinking about the Mauna Kea protests just last week in Hawaii. How do we have these fundamental questions of who owns the land still a problem today?
Well, I mean, I think that when you look at the President Obama, designating certain areas as set aside spiritually, and then that gets reversed by this administration, not understanding the cultural significance of these places and what that means. I mean, I think it's interesting when you look at places like North Dakota, it is really very much frowned upon and illegal to disrupt a cemetery in North Dakota. Well, you know, we need to understand that for a lot of Native American tribes, there are places that are holy, there are places that are spiritual, there are places that need to be recognized. And over the years, there's been tons of federal laws passed that will recognize the sanctity of those places, that how sacred those places are. But when there's competition, like I want to drill there, I want to drill an oil well there, or I want to produce a mine, as in the case of Alaska, then all of a sudden those interests or those commitments that the federal government has made to recognize these spiritual places is completely done away with in interest of or in support of a special interest. Mm-hmm. And so I think that the tribes have a very, very legitimate concern, and the tribes are engaging early on, which I think is so critical and so important. And I really look forward to seeing the outcome of this. But, you know, during when I was in the Senate, Senator Franken and Tester and I used to have ongoing dialogues with our colleagues in our caucus, basically saying, do you understand that on some reservations, 90% of the women will have been victims of sexual assault or domestic violence? Do you understand that the rates of suicide on Indian reservations are in epidemic proportions? The Montana is struggling with this right now. And so I think there's got to be that awareness, not just of the legal foundations and the treaty obligations, but there has to be an awareness of what's happening right now if we are, in fact, going to provide support for the Indigenous people of our country.
Yeah. Heidi Heitkamp, we really appreciate you bringing your expertise and talking about these important issues with us. Thank you. We're going to switch gears, though, to a lighter note. 538 asked everyone about those political cliches that so often we use. Can you tell the difference if someone's talking about political commentary or sports commentary? I know I'm guilty of some of those cliches in my writing. They asked people what they thought. Take a listen, see if you can tell a difference.
Hey Sarah, hey Micah, hi Maya. Hello Nate. All right, thanks for doing this. Like I said, I pulled some quotes from pre and post debate coverage and various sporting events. I'm gonna read you the quotes and I want you to tell me if they are from sports or from the debates. All right, the first one. It's gonna be like Home Alone 2. Home Alone 1 was great. Home Alone 2 was just as good, if not better.
That's politics.
I'm gonna go with sports.
Sports.
I'm gonna say sports.
I'm gonna go with politics.
I think that's sports. Debates.
It's gonna be like Home Alone 2.
Right, okay.
Home Alone 1 was great. Home Alone 2 was just as good, if not better.
That's very
I thought that would be like about the second debate.
This is cruel. This is a cruel game.
Wasn't Home Alone 2 a bad movie?
You're right. Her personality, she's a dog. She will mix it up. She's not afraid of that part of the game.
Debate.
I think that's politics.
Can you repeat the question, please?
That is from sports.
Debate.
I'm gonna say politics.
Her personality, she is a dog. She will mix it up. She's not afraid of that part of the game.
Sophie Cunningham.
What?
She's a dog. Really great commentary.
These are messing with my head.
Because if someone had called a woman a dog in the political sphere, I would have known about it.
He has the ability to take a licking, keep on taking, take a bruising, keep on cruising.
Awful. That's great. That's gotta be sports.
Sports.
Politics?
Sports.
Politics? Sports.
And the fact that he has demonstrated to this point, as a front runner, he has the ability to take a licking, keep on ticking, take a bruising, and keep on cruising.
What? Who said that? That's terrible.
Oh.
No, darn it. Damn. Yeah, no, not terrible on your part, just like who would write that?
He got into the fight. His team will be happy that he showed up, that he responded, that he fired back.
I feel like you don't normally call staffers their team. Ooh, but that's why it could be a trick.
Debate? Debate.
I'm gonna say sports.
Sports.
Got into the fight. His team will be happy that he showed up, that he responded, that he fired back. I think his performance, if you go over the whole 2 hours.
His team. What team are we talking about? Like the Democrats?
I think I actually watched that live.
That makes sense.
I'm getting the hang of this now.
Who calls somebody's staffers their team?
And thanks to our friends at 538 for that. This has been The Briefing Room. I'm Mary Alice Parks. We'll be back here tomorrow.